Hey, welcome to Haftarah Ekev. We are in Isaiah 49, verse 14 through 51, verse 3. So we are in the second of those 7 Haftarahs of consolation that I told you about earlier. These are the ones that we read between now and Rosh Hashanah, which is, of course, also called Feast of Trumpets. And during these 7 consolation, God conveys hope through Isaiah. And it's hope for the generations who wait for the full redemption. Okay? So that's us, every bit as much as it was to his listeners, right? And I want you to see these consolations as being directly for you too, okay? So in this particular Haftarah, this is one of my favorite ones, I think. And I may say that next week as well. But I like it because Isaiah begins to tackle a fear that I think we all have, but I think it's one we're afraid of voicing. Because sometimes in the saying of this fear, it makes it all the more real, okay? So the Haftarah starts out by saying, Zion has said, the Lord has forsaken me, the Lord has forgotten me. Okay, so yeah, we're going there, right? Isaiah insists that this is what we're going to talk about. God insists that this is what we're going to talk about. I've been waiting so long for you to rescue me in this area, God, that I don't know that I believe that you care about me anymore. Okay? So I want you to sit with that for a moment. And I want you to prayerfully check yourself to see how that sort of thought plays out in your own personal walk with God. Now, Isaiah is referring to the time that it's taking for the full redemption and the rebuilding, right? And I don't want us to lose sight of that, but I don't want you to miss out on an opportunity to take this lesson into something specific in your own life, your own personal situation. That area where you maybe don't even talk to people about, maybe you don't even talk to God about, where you kind of doubt whether he really cares about you because your rescue is taking so long, okay? Now, first thing I want you to know is that having those kinds of thoughts, like Israel did, I think it actually shows a decent amount of faith in God. Okay? Now, what do I mean by that? So we're asking, does God care about me in this situation? Right? Does God care about restoring and redeeming like he's promised? So what does that already assume? Number one, it assumes that there's a God, right? Now, you and I take this for granted, but let's kind of step back a little bit and recognize that there's a bit of faith in that. Because there's so many in the world today that don't even allow for God to be existing, right? And then what else does that say? Or what else does it assume? It assumes God's a promise keeper, right? Well, it assumes he's a promise maker, and it assumes that you already believe that he has communicated with you about restoration, right? Now, whether that's redemption of the world that Isaiah explicitly is talking about, or redemption in that one area that's in question in your life. So when you ask a variation of the question, has God abandoned me? Has he forgotten me? First off, I want you to know that shows a level of faith already. And it assumes that God has the power to make good on his promises, right? So if we're talking, if we're thinking about what might be some obstacles to full faith in redemption, that's redemption with a capital R, and redemption in your own specific area, the first hurdle in that has already been won, right? So that question of ours that we're afraid to ask, but Isaiah asks it for us, that assumes that God can, he has the ability, and he does interfere with the forces of history, right? In fact, he does enter our story. And if you didn't have that faith already, you wouldn't have any need for the question that we're dealing with now. Has God abandoned me? Has he forgotten me? Is that why this rescue hasn't happened? So let's take a look at what God's response to that question is in the Haftarah. Now, in the Haftarah, the people are saying that the length of time that it's taking for the full redemption is a sure sign that God's given up. And they look around to the raging nations, and they say that's a sure sign that God has given up. And they probably look to their own poor spiritual condition, and they say that's a sure sign that God has given up on them. So I want to ask you, what are the signs that you're looking at in your individual life that seem to indicate that he has given up on you? And I want you to write those down. I want you to know that writing them down actually does not give them more power. It names it. And there's this phrase I love. I don't remember where I heard it. Name it to tame it. So write down those signs, and that's going to actually help you to see how little power it actually has. So writing them down can help you see the falsehood in them. All right. Now, God has a response for the Israelites in this Haftarah, and his response is for you too in your particular individual area. Okay. So what he does is he shows us that it's impossible for him to forget us or stop caring about us. Okay? His answer is all about his unchanging nature. It's his nature that is what we can bank our assurances on, that he will always care for us. Now, a little bit more on that later. And when we realize that his promises stand because of his character, then it stops being about us, right? And it becomes about his faithfulness and his past actions demonstrating his care, even if it's taking a long time in our estimation for him to come to our aid. And it's important to emphasize this because we're talking about rescue and redemption and fulfilled promises that often take a long time, right? So when we are centered back on his character in the situation, then we realize that his caring of us and caring for us, it doesn't have anything to do with our performance. Okay? So how many times have you had a version of these thoughts? If I only was a better person, or if I was more lovable, or if I studied more, or if I could quote scripture more, or I don't know, if I was taller, or if I was shorter, or if I was blonde, or if I was gray, or I was not gray, or you get what I'm saying? Whatever it is that you think is why he's forgotten you in his promise. If only that, then he'd not forget me or forsake me. And through this Haftarah, God wants you to know that it's fundamentally impossible for him, because of his nature, for him to forget or stop caring about you. And the length of time it takes to receive the salvation, the rescue, that has nothing to do with his care of you. So again, to the question, what was God's response? And he says, "See, I have engraved you on the palms of your hands. Your walls are ever before me." Now, God is spirit, so we know that this is symbolic. But let's take a look at this, okay? So this is carefully chosen language. The Hebrew word that we read as engraved, it's related to the concept of writing, but it's a little bit different, okay? So in writing, you're adding something, okay? Piece of paper and a pen, we're adding ink to the paper, right? With engraving, you're actually removing something. Now, if you know anything about cuneiform writing, there's like a pen type thing called a stylus, and it digs into the clay tablet and removes some of the clay from the tablet, right? And then, we have some examples, modern examples, names on a trophy that engraved, right? So to engrave you on the palm of his hand, that means that something was removed to make a place for you. And when you think about it, isn't this really the picture of what God has done for us in creation, right? In the creation of our universe. He's made a room for us, He diminished some of himself to carve out a place for us in the creation of our universe. So this phrase, I've engraved you in the palm of my hand, it's like he's saying, remember what I've done for you already. Now, God is referred to as Ha-Makon. In Hebrew, that means the place. He is the place of the world, but the world is not his place. He diminished himself, so say the sages, so that we can have a place. So in the creation account, God speaks and the creation comes into being. From our perspective, before the creation, there was nothing, and then God made the universe and there was something. The creation of the universe is, it's a kind of diminishment, because before its creation, there was nothing else besides the divine. There was nothing that was really separate from God. So the world that we know is God's special carved out place for us to exist. And it's perfect for us, right? But not for God. So in creating the universe, God makes space for something besides himself, that engravement. And he teaches us this concept actually through female anatomy. Because what is a womb but a special set apart place within a woman's body that actually serves us no function, but it's a special place for something that is not the woman, right? In Exodus 34:6, it says, and he, speaking of God, he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Now that word compassionate, that is rahim, the Hebrew word, and it's the first word that God ever used to describe himself. And it's also the word for womb. Isn't that cool? So getting back to the Hebrew word for engraved. This word is also related to the Hebrew word for law or decree, which would be something legally binding and permanent. And that's important. So by telling you that he's engraved you on the palm of his hand, he's saying that he's made a permanent record of you symbolically in a place where he's active, because our hands, our palms, that speaks of our actions. And, it's no coincidence that Yeshua receives sort of an engraving in his hands, right? For our sake. John 20:27 says, then he said to Thomas, put your finger here and see my hands. And then reach your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe. And then in Genesis 49:10, it uses the same word here, but this time it's translated as lawgiver, and it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver, engraved, from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So the message in this Haftarah is clear. God's not going to forget you. He's not going to leave you. He's not going to abandon you. And so the encouragement is, ask him, if you have not, keep asking him to strengthen your faith in this area. And ask him to give you signs of his everlasting favor in his engravement. And maybe this, when you read and reread this Haftarah after this lesson, maybe this can be one of those signs for you. I'll see you next week, the next Haftarah.